Hey there, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're jumping into something with a truly fascinating past and a very active present. The Bangladesh Army.
Mm-hmm.
Our guide for this deep dive is a detailed excerpt from Wikipedia, the version from June 2025, to be exact.
A pretty comprehensive snapshot.
Right, our goal. To kind of cut through all that dense information, pull out the essential points, and really help you quickly understand its journey, its structure, and what it's focused on now.
And this text really does give us a solid foundation. It traces the Army's story from its earliest roots right up to, well, modern strategic goals. We'll be moving through history and organization.
Highlighting the moments and details that really matter.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Think of this as your way to get a clear picture of the Bangladesh Army, all based directly on the text we have in front of us without getting bogged down in every single detail.
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's kick things off right at the beginning because the source points to some really deep historical roots.
It really does.
We're talking about Bengal's long martial tradition, going way back to the armies of ancient kings and the well-organized forces of the Bengal Sultanate.
And you see a big shift when the Mughals came in, introducing things like cannons, artillery, that kind of thing.
Right. But the real transformation described in the source happened under British colonial rule.
Definitely. The text highlights pivotal moments, like the defeats at Plassey in 1757.
And Buxar, 1764.
Yeah, where the British forces overcame the Bengal army. And this led to the formation of the Army of Bengal, which, later became part of the much larger British Indian Army.
What's particularly interesting here, according to the source, is how recruitment changed after the 1857 mutiny.
This is quite something.
The British actually shifted recruitment for units with Bengal in their name away from Bengali people, even if they were technically in the Bengal presidency.
Seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? But that's what the text says.
But it wasn't a total shutdown, was it? The source points out specific examples.
Like the Bengali Paltan.
Exactly. Formed during WWI specifically to recruit from Bengal. Interestingly, the text says they were trained quite far away in Karachi.
Yeah, Karachi.
Then fought in Baghdad, and even helped put down a rebellion by Kurds in 1919. Quite a journey.
And during WWII, you had the Indian Army Pioneer Corps, formed by the British Indian Army's Eastern Command.
Right, and the source mentions this force recruited mostly from both West and East Bengal.
They weren't just fighters, though. They were more like combat engineers building roads, airfields.
But they saw action, too, against the Japanese.
They did. And the text specifically names Captain Abdul Ghani as a company commander in that Pioneer Corps on the Burma front.
Ah, okay. Now, this is where the source connects that history directly to the push for an army in the Pakistan period, right?
Exactly. According to the text, Captain Ghani played this crucial role after the war. He saw the East Bengali soldiers and the pioneer troops waiting to be demobilized.
And had this vision.
Yeah, of forming an infantry regiment specifically from them. He actually got approval from the Chief of Staff of the Pakistan Army, General Sir Frank Messervy, back in 1947.
And the source includes this really striking quote from General Messervy saying, Bengali soldiers would prove to the world that Bengali soldiers are equally competent as other nations. Powerful stuff.
It is. Captain Ghani then went to Dhaka, found the site, and organized the building of what became the Kurmitola Cantonment.
So the flag of the 1st East Bengal Regiment was raised there on February 15, 1948.
That's right. The text notes Captain Ghani managed the affairs, though the first CO was British.
And a 2nd Battalion followed soon after.
Yep, approved quickly. And the source states that by the lead up to 1971, there were a total of 8 battalions of the East Bengal Regiment.
Which naturally leads us straight into the Bangladesh War of Independence.
A critical turning point.
The text details how Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League won the 1970 elections decisively.
But the Pakistani military junta refused to transfer power.
Which led to the infamous Operation Searchlight on March 25, 1971, followed by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Declaration of Independence.
The immediate aftermath described in the source was, well, revolt. Bengali soldiers stationed in East Pakistan rose up.
And a critical step in organizing this resistance was the Bangladesh Army Sector Commanders Conference in July 1971.
Yes, a very important meeting.
The source even gives us the location, Mirpur, Kushtia. Why was this conference so key?
Well, the text says it's where the command structure for the entire war effort was decided. Colonel Red M.A.G. Osmani was appointed as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Okay, so formalizing the leadership.
Exactly. And flowing from that meeting, the text says the country was divided into 11 sectors for guerrilla warfare.
With specific commanders directing operations in each area.
Right. There was even a 10th sector directly under the commander-in-chief, including special forces like the Naval Commando Unit.
The source then describes a further refinement of this structure. The Bangladesh forces were organized into 3 brigade-sized combat groups.
hmm Named after their commanders, drawn from the text. K-Force under Major Khaled Mosharraf,
S-Force under Major K.M. Shafila.
and Z-Force under Major Zayar Rahman. This structure was absolutely crucial for guiding the liberation war efforts.
Okay, let's shift gears. Let's move into the years immediately after 1971, which the source paints as quite turbulent.
Turbulent is definitely the word.
It describes how personnel from the Mukti Bahini, the liberation fighters, were brought into the different branches of the new Bangladesh army.
And later, in 1974, soldiers and officers who returned from being held in Pakistan were also integrated.
So a period of consolidation, but also laying formal groundwork.
Yes, exactly. You see the establishment of various administrative branches and core engineering, signals, medical, and so on. The text notes the Bangladesh Military Academy, BMA, was founded in 74.
And the President Guard Regiment, PGR, in 75.
Right, showing the new army building its institutional structure.
However, the source then introduces what it explicitly calls a bloody chapter.
Yes, this is a difficult part of the history presented.
It points to underlying tensions within the army and between the army and the ruling administration. The text mentions suspicion around the paramilitary Jatiya Iraqi Bahini
Right.
and friction caused by integrating civilian Mukti Bahini members. It seems this created disputes between professional officers and the government.
And just to be clear, we're presenting the source's account impartially here.
Absolutely. This is how the text describes the climate leading into a very difficult period.
And the source details a rapid and frankly tragic sequence of events starting on August 15th, 1975.
Okay.
It states that a group of sacked army officers, joined by disgruntled junior officers and NCOs, secretly planned and carried out the assassination of President Sheikh Mujibur Rahman.
And his entire family at his home in Dhaka.
Yes, the text notes his 2 daughters who were abroad at the time survived,
The source mentions the subsequent government led by Kandakar Mushtaq Ahmed.
who was supported by the coup plotters.
And a key detail from the text. Kandakar Mushtaq passed an indemnity ordinance, basically granting immunity to the assassins.
A really significant detail. Then the text describes a counter-coup just 3 months later, November 3, 1975.
Led by Major General Khaled Mosharraf and Colonel Shafat Jamil.
Their aim, according to the source, was to remove Kandakar Mushtaq's government.
But tragically,
Tragically, the source states that on that same day, the same group of disgruntled army personnel who carried out the August coup assassinated 4 jailed leaders, Syed Nazrul Islam, Tajuddin Ahmed, Mohammed Mansour Ali, and AHM Kamaruzaman inside Dhaka Central Jail.
awful. And meanwhile, Ziaur Rahman, who was chief of army staff then,
Was placed under house arrest, according to the text.
just a few days after that, November 7, 1975, the source details another uprising.
Another one. It's described as short, very organized, mainly focused in Dhaka.
Led by Lieutenant Colonel Red Abu Tahir, with support for the JSD political party and enlisted personnel.
That's right. The source states this uprising led to the deaths of several Army and Air Force officers, including Major General Khaled Mosharraf and Major ATM Haider,
And Colonel Shafat Jamil was
arrested and forced into retirement. The text notes that Colonel Abu Tahir released Major General Ziaur Rahman from house arrest.
Okay, so Tahir frees Ziaur Rahman.
And following this, Ziaur Rahman is described as taking control, promoting himself to lieutenant general, and appointing himself chief of army staff and deputy chief martial law administrator.
A stark detail from the source is that Ziaur Rahman then ordered the execution of Lieutenant Colonel Abu Tahir.
For his role in that November 7 uprising.
Wow. Later, in 1977, the text says Ziaur Rahman became president after a referendum.
But his presidency ended abruptly when he was assassinated in Chattogram during a military coup attempt on May 30th, 1981.
And the turbulent period just kept going.
It did. Less than a year later, March 24th, 1982, the source states that Lieutenant General Hussein Mohammad Ershad, then Chief of Army Staff, took power in what's called a silent coup.
Suspending the Constitution, imposing martial law?
Yes, and he remained in control until December 6, 1990.
Wow. That's an incredibly rapid and complex sequence of events described in the source for those first few years after independence.
It really is.
It really shows how deeply intertwined the Army became with the political struggles of the new nation.
It certainly does. And the source then transitions to another significant domestic challenge the Army faced, the Chattagram Hill Tracts conflict.
Right. Described as a 20-year political and military conflict from 77 to 97.
Involving the government against a group called the PCJSS and its armed wing, the Shanti-Bikini.
And the conflict, according to the text, was about seeking autonomy and rights for the region's indigenous tribes.
With the Army deployed for counterinsurgency operations.
The source highlights details that really get to the heart of the antagonism, doesn't it?
It does. It mentions the unpopular Chittagong Hill Tracts Development Board being run by an Army general.
And critically, it points to the unresolved issue of tribal displacement caused way back by the 1962 Kaptai Dam,
Noting an estimated 100,000 people were displaced.
including 40,000 Chakma who had to flee to India, a huge number.
And the text provides some powerful data on demographic changes in the region, which, fueled tensions.
How so?
It states that settling Bengali people in the area during the 1980s led to the eviction of many tribesmen. The numbers are striking. Bengalis grew from just 11.6% of the regional population in 1974.
To nearly half. 48.5% by 1991.
48.5% by 1991, according to the source. That's a massive shift.
So the path towards resolving this conflict, as outlined in the source.
Involved peace talks starting in 1991, though they apparently made little headway at first.
Talks picked up again in 96.
They did, and eventually led to the signing of the Chattagram Hill Tracts Peace Accord on December 10th, 1997.
Okay, so with that major domestic conflict addressed, the source then describes a period of significant growth and reorganization for the Army, bringing us closer to its modern form.
Yes, moving towards the present day. The text notes that after the 75 events, additional personnel were absorbed into the regular army when the paramilitary Jatiyo Rekhi Bahini was disbanded.
Under Z.R. Rahman, the source mentions Bangladesh was divided into 5 military regions. And by the time Ershad took power in '82, the Army had about 70,000 troops.
Which grew significantly.
Right. By mid-1988, it was around 90,000. That's triple the size it was in 1975, according to the text.
Yeah, and the current size cited is substantial, 160,000 troops, plus over 13,000 civilians.
That's a large force.
It is. The source also points out the Army began participating in international operations relatively early.
Like the Gulf War.
Specifically mentions their involvement in the Gulf War in 1991 as part of the multinational force in Operation Desert Storm.
And a notable task highlighted was their engineers clearing landmines and bombs in Kuwait.
Yes, under something called Operation Rebuilding Kuwait. It was an early sign of their role expanding beyond national borders.
Interesting. Now, structurally, it aligns with Commonwealth armies, but the text mentions U.S. influence.
A significant recent influence, yeah. The adoption of U.S. Army procedures in areas like tactical planning, training management, and NCO education.
Non-commissioned officers.
Right. This strategic alignment seems to set the stage for the ambitious Forces Goal 2030.
Ah, yes, the modernization plan.
The source describes this as a major long-term plan for modernization and reorganization that began around 2017.
What does this goal entail, according to the text?
Well, a core element is dividing the Army into 3 core: Central, Eastern, and Western, and building new bases.
And a really significant part is dramatically increasing the number of infantry divisions.
Yes, adding 3 new ones to reach a total of 10. That's a big jump.
And the source gets into the specifics of the modernization, doesn't it, for the individual soldier?
It does. Improvements like better combat armor, ballistic goggles, night vision systems, GPS devices.
And upgraded sights for their standard rifles, the BD-08s.
Exactly. The Elite Paracommando Brigade also got a 2nd Commando Battalion.
What about heavier equipment, armored forces?
On the armored front, the text lists upgrades like acquiring Chinese MBT-2000 tanks, main battle tanks, and modernizing older tanks to improve standards like Type 69 IIG and Type 59G Durjoy.
And infantry mobility, getting troops around.
Boosted with vehicles like BTR-80 armored personnel carriers, Otokar Cobra Light armored vehicles, or LAVs.
And those Max Pro MRAPs. Mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle.
Right. Built for protection against roadside bombs and ambushes. Very important in modern conflicts.
Artillery and anti-tank capabilities are seeing upgrades too, based on the source.
Significant upgrades. Acquisitions include Serbian Nora B-52K2, self-propelled howitzers mobile artillery.
Right.
WS-22 MLRS, that's a multiple launch rocket system for firing barrages of rockets.
Area denial, basically.
Pretty much. Plus anti-tank systems like METAS-M and PF-98, and tenders out for even more new anti-tank weapons.
The source also covers air defense additions, like FM-90 SAM's surface-to-air missiles.
Yes, and plans for new radars and man-pads, those man-portable air defense systems.
And the Army Aviation Wing is getting more modern.
Definitely. New helicopters like the Mi-171S, transport aircraft like the C-295W, and plans mentioned for attack helicopters.
And drones, UAVs.
They've also picked up reconnaissance UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, eyes in the sky.
Looking ahead, the text even mentions a planned riverine brigade.
Suggesting a focus on inland waterways. Yeah. Acquisition of various vessels, a command ship, landing craft, troop carriers.
And as an example of specific international partnerships noted in the source, there's that deal with Turkey.
A government-to-government, G2G, agreement from 2021, leading to exports of things like RocketSense TRG-300 Tiger MLRS, so specific modern systems coming in.
Moving on, one of the most internationally recognized roles of the Bangladesh Army, according to the source, is its huge participation in UN peacekeeping operations, or UNPSO.
Absolutely, a major part of their identity now. The text says this involvement actually started way back in the 1970s.
But initiated more formally by President Ershad in '88.
That's right, with initial deployments to UN missions in places like Iraq and Namibia, UNAMOG, and UNTAG.
The source really emphasizes the scale of their contribution, doesn't it?
It does, stating they've been involved in up to 30 different UN missions across as many as 25 countries. It lists many specific examples showing the breadth.
And it also highlights the sacrifice made. 88 Bangladeshi soldiers had lost their lives serving as peacekeepers as of February 2009.
A significant cost. What stands out from the text is the praise they've received internationally.
Their performance described as being of the highest order.
Yes, and senior Bangladeshi officers have commanded major UN missions. The source even quotes the BBC, calling them the cream of UN peacekeepers back in 2004.
High praise indeed. This commitment isn't just about deployment, though. The source notes they've invested in training.
Very much so. They established BIPSO, the Bangladesh Institute of Peace Support Operation Training.
Specializing in training peacekeepers specifically according to UN requirements.
Exactly. It shows a real dedication to doing this global role properly.
The source also touches on the increasing role of women within the Army.
An important development. While women could join as officers earlier, particularly in medical fields, the text mentions Captain Satara Begum as an example.
They could only enlist as soldiers, starting much more recently in 2013.
That's right, 2013 for enlisted soldiers.
And the source highlights significant milestones for women.
Including the first female Major General, Suzanne Giti, who reached that rank in 2018. She was initially commissioned in the Medical Corps.
And in 2019, the text notes the Army appointed its first 4 female battalion commanders.
A big step in operational leadership roles.
Okay, looking at the overall internal organization described in the source. How's it structured?
It's structured around Army headquarters and various administrative corps, divided by function. Pretty standard military organization in that sense.
These include categories like combat arms, that's your fighting units, like armored, artillery, infantry, the paracommandos. Combat support, which are essential services like engineers, signals, military intelligence.
The enablers.
Right. And combat service support, covering things like supply, ordnance, medical services. It shows the range of specialized roles.
The source also briefly covers the rank structure. Commissioned officers are classified by the government as first-class gazetted officers,
which distinguishes them legally and administratively from NCOs and enlisted soldiers.
Exactly. And a key concept mentioned throughout the source is cantonments.
Ah, yes. The bases.
Vital military areas where personnel live, train, and work. The text lists numerous examples across the country: Dhaka, Chattogram, Bagura, Kumilla, Jashore, and others.
Highlighting the Army's significant physical footprint nationwide.
Definitely. Finally, the source provides a long list of educational and training institutes associated with the Army.
Like medical colleges, universities.
Multiple medical colleges, universities like the Bangladesh University of Professionals, BUP, and the Military Institute of Science and Technology, MIST.
and specialized schools like the BMA or the School of Infantry and Tactics.
Right. This really emphasizes the Army's focus on professional education and specialized training for its personnel, from cadets right up to seasoned officers and soldiers.
So there you have it, a deep dive straight from the provided text, tracing the Bangladesh Army's path from its historical roots
All the way back.
and through those incredibly turbulent post-independence years to its prominent role in international peacekeeping and its ambitious modernization goals laid out in Forces Goal 2030.
We've navigated through the key milestones and structural elements presented in the source, aiming to give you a clear understanding of this institution's complex journey and its, multifaceted role today.
Absolutely. To wrap things up, and building on what the source has shown us about the Army's journey, especially its history of deep involvement in domestic political events, alongside its growing international role and that big push for modernizing its capabilities, here's a thought for you to consider.
Mm-hmm.
How does this unique blend of historical domestic involvement and current global engagement and modernization shape the identity and future mission of the Bangladesh Army? Balancing internal stability with global engagement, as suggested by all these different roles and plans outlined in the source.
A very interesting question to ponder.
That's all for this deep dive. We hope it's giving you some useful insights.
Thanks for joining us.